Pricing Committee, Velvet Rope Cartel, turning every checkout into Dante.
Welcome to another episode of the Pricing Committee, and today we're going to go through a few articles, but the first one is probably the bleeding obvious, and it's the obvious in the sense that we knew this whole TokenMaxxing thing wouldn't last for very long. It's a nice idea, really good for podcast, really good in terms of the media, but let's be fair, it's a pretty shit idea. Basically, getting people to spend as much as possible to get up a leaderboard is never really the way to encourage the best behaviour, especially when you have to scale down very, very quickly after the furore about the amount of tokens being burned. And so we're going to go over to the first article, which is from, let me just check, I think it's called the AI News. So we're just going to head over there now. So here's the article in, apologies, AI Magazine. And it basically says what we kind of know, the obvious, that Amazon dropped its internal AI usage leaderboard. Now, it's reported yesterday, and it's very obvious this is going to happen, but maybe Amazon got more out of it than we feel. One, they've got some publicity saying they're actually using AI, which is always positive in the current kind of pre-IPO world where everybody's going crazy over AI. Two, it did actually internally, in my mind, obviously add some element of spice, some element of making sure that people actually knew that they had to use AI. And three, it kind of showed who would be using it the most. How would they use it? They might have come up with a couple of good things, almost like the thing back to Google Friday, way back when someone came up with Google Maps or whatever it was, just by doing nothing else on Friday related to real work, just like, let's just say, dicking around. And so in that sense, I suppose if Amazon can't afford to token max, then I suppose the question would be, can anybody really afford token max? And I don't think they can. And so what we'll come on to next is there really a demand problem? And this sounds irrational because people think there's a supply problem. But is there really a demand problem with AI? And we'll come on to that in just a second. So what do I mean by a demand problem? Now, most people think we're in a supply kind of shock for AI in the sense that you can see the Anthropic dealing with Elon's company, essentially trying to buy more compute and more capacity, Google doing the same thing with XAI. And I suppose you could argue that the narrative is that there's a shortage of tokens or GPUs or capacity or compute capacity. But I think there's actually a demand shortage. And what do I mean by that? Essentially, let's take one of the jobs that we think will be a real job in AI, some sort of AI governance. Now, it doesn't matter whether a company has one person or two people or 10 people if it's a big firm. There's 100% a role for that because the regulators around the globe, EU particularly, UK stepping up, and even eventually the US will have to get on top of some sort of governance around how the company's using AI. And there'll be reporting, there'll be control, there'll be all the normal governance-y things. There is no way that isn't going to be a role in most firms. But there isn't actually obvious demand because most people don't know they actually need it yet. Or they think they need it, but they can wait till someone else has it first. And so all of these reports we're getting about token maxing is kind of giving us a supply shock. We don't have enough supply and it's going to be a problem, and that's obviously affecting prices. But I think there's not enough demand for AI. And I suppose if you look at one of the articles that looking at yesterday, which said there are more people that are willing to pay for Netflix than there are for basically for GPTs. And some people say that's nonsense. There's a billion people using ChatGPT and Anthropic and stuff. Yeah, there is, but there isn't a billion people paying for it. Whereas there's actually hundreds of million people paying for Netflix and Disney and Paramount and HBO, etc. If you add all of them up, probably circa 300 million. I think Netflix was at 200 million plus the other day. So probably 300 million around the globe willing to pay money for entertainment in that sense. But only really kind of 5% of the billion. So what are we talking? Basically 50 odd million maybe willing to pay for GPT. So I think there's a demand problem because just like the governance role, even when we know it's needed, there's still a gap. And there's a gap because people don't know how to fill that gap, and there isn't resources and education and experience in how to fill that gap. So in this sense, there's, let's just say, a use of AI, which I think is pretty good. But there's actually a lot of work that goes into that good use. And a good example would be something like a SAP or Salesforce. Salesforce is much derided as a tool that no one really likes, yet everybody seems to have it. And they have it because it's really a SOP in kind of corporate terms. It's not an SOP, an SOP. An SOP is a standard operating procedure. Here you go, here's a manual, Jimmy, Jane, Jemima, Gerard, that's a G. This is what we do, this is how we do it. And in the absence of that, you have to kind of assume that someone knows what they're doing. And even if they know what they're doing, doesn't mean they're going to do it the way that your firm wants it done. And so the SOP that I think a SAP or Salesforce, or in the old day, the PeopleSoft, might be Gusto now, or Lattice, they impose an operating model on you, which actually allows what we called now defunct term of digital transformation. It wasn't really digital transformation. We had digital stuff that was around many, many years before. It was really a coalescing of the way we're going to run the operating model. It was really more a digital operating model transformation. This is what we used to do, pen and paper, etc., or fragmented. This is what we're going to do now. And that really allowed a complete mind kind of shift in the way that people think about stuff. And if you think about it, if you know that there's a tool that kind of adds a 75% percentile SOP, you only have to layer your 25% of uniqueness on top. But if you have to go from 0 to 1, or from 0 to 100%, you've got a lot of problems. And so I think there's a demand problem for AI, not because it's not good. I think it's quite good. But there's so much infrastructure around basically the AI and the architecture around the AI that basically needs to be done from a human perspective. And there, people are talking about harnesses and this and that. Those are all lovely, how to use a model, how to get efficiency. But there isn't a harness around the humans. And that harness around the humans is required. And I think if you were looking from a pricing perspective at any point in time, you're interested in a tool. But I think sometimes SaaS undersold itself because it was really selling an operating model. And those aren't easy to buy because you would pay a fortune for, I don't know, it could be, let's just say, Deloitte's or any other big four firm. I worked at Deloitte, so I said Deloitte's first. It could be McKinsey, it could be Bain, it could be anybody who will give you an operating model. And that will normally cost you a fortune. And they produce a big deck and it'd be called kind of target operating model was of the day in the 2010. It was nonsense. But it was nonsense because it wasn't really a lived experience. But you could argue with the software, it is a lived experience. The reason why Salesforce is updating certain elements of its code is because someone probably asked for it out of its millions of customers, and you get the benefit of that. And yes, it's a pain in the A to onboard and to maintain and to understand what those are. But they're probably there for a reason. And it's clunky for a reason. The friction is there for a reason, and it isn't just to annoy the hell out of you. It's there because an operating model is friction, because otherwise people would just be doing what they fancy. And so the demand problem for AI in the sense that there is not enough harness around the human use of AI and understanding the use of AI and the procedures around it, which means people are now running scared. And the whole TokenMaxxing, you can kind of bring back to the story of saying that was someone trying to break out of the control model and say, what if we went to a new, dare I use the word and get yellow card, a paradigm where this is the way we should be using technology, not the way SAP or Salesforce told us to use it. And that's why I believe there's a demand problem. There's a demand because we do not yet know how to fill that gap between, we know we want to use it, and it's over here, and our capability is literally falling in the middle. And until our capability basically gap closes, what it can do, what we know it can do, or what we know how to do, until that closes, there's always going to be, I think, a demand shortage, not a supply shortage. So that's the pod for the day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
The Pricing Committee, velvet rope cartel, turning every checkout into Dante's seventh hell. Can we simplify? Gets treated like a crime, cause complexity looks smart when you present it in a slide. Every metric looking healthy till the profit disappear, like magic trick performed by venture capitalists of the year. Net retention floating high like a helium parade till the AWS invoice enters with a switchblade.